Okay, good morning again, everybody, and I'm sorry for the confusion. And so, this is our first session of wandering through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And um, this is exciting for me. It's a whole new thing, and this Ignatian thing has become really significant for me in the practice of the things that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, what we're going to do today is just a real general introduction. Eventually, my hope is we're going to get to this book here. This is God's Voice Within. This is written by a Jesuit named Mark Thibodeau. And this is about one part of the spiritual exercises, which is the rules for discernment. And the rules for discernment are actually an appendix to the spiritual exercises themselves. But it's really important. The first thing he does, is define desolation and consolation. And desolation consolation is defined as in sync with God. And you know that because you have feelings of faith and hope and love. Ignatius was one of the first people, I think, to put forth this notion that the way I feel is the result of my way of life. It's like serenity is not a goal, but serenity is a, a byproduct or a result of the way I live. And one of the readings that we did that has been is really important for me. It's number 5. Jennifer got to read it. Just to the extent that I humbly rely on God and do as I think God would have me do, will I be enabled to experience spiritual serenity right in the midst of the human calamity. You could say that the human calamity is desolation, and you could say that the feeling of serenity is consolation. Um, and Ignatius discovered this while healing from he was a knight in shining armor. He was a nobleman in Spain and Loyola, Spain, and he was part of a war effort that was going on, and he got hit with a cannonball in his leg, and so he's convalescing, and to pass the time, because he enjoyed daydreaming and fantasizing, and the use of the imagination becomes an important part of the spiritual exercises. So he um, asked for romance novels, chivalry, and damsels in distress, and all of that kind of stuff. And they didn't have any. What they had was the lives of the saints, and something maybe about the life of Jesus. So he starts reading them both, and he discovers sooner or later that while he feels good, while he's fantasizing about daring deeds and military stuff and damsels in distress, it doesn't last. And when he reads about the lives of the saints and what they did, what their lives were focused on, he feels good and it lasts. And so he eventually makes this distinction: consolation and desolation. Consolation in sync with God, I feel faith and hope and love, and desolation is out of sync with God, um, and I feel doubt and despair and fear. And so then what's pretty incredible, I find, is he's just gets very specific about, once you've recognized what state you're in, um, what to do about it. And of course, being a religious person, all the tools of the Catholic Church, like uh, confession, prayer, those are big things. Devotion to the church, devotion to Mother Mary, all that stuff, and using the Bible as literature to get you um, engaged with this stuff. that's what he wound up doing. He had a conversion experience uh, in I think he was 32 years old or so, and I'm going to read you a couple of passages from a biography, an autobiography of him, and so let's see. Um, um, what do I want to show you? Um, oh yeah, I wanted to show you this book. Whoops. I'm sorry, not quite as organized as I am with the big book. Why are you hiding from me? Ah. So, so St. Ignatius was a Spaniard. He lived for 65 years. He's born in 1491, and I've been learning a lot of history. You'll remember that 1492 was when Columbus discovered America. It was the Caribbean. Um, Ferdinand and Isabella were the king and queen of Spain, and they were quite influential in a lot of things that have happened. He's part of nobility. He has a life at the court. He works as a treasurer. He works as a soldier. He does all this different stuff. And as I said, he got wounded in battle, and he has this conversion experience. And eventually, he starts right to work on these spiritual exercises, but they don't get published until I want to say 1548. And I'm just going to read you something about the spiritual exercises because I find it fascinating. And this, what I'm reading to you, is coming out of this thing. It's called Alone and on Foot. And this is an abridgment uh, of a 700-page book about his life that was written a while ago in a different language. So he's a hard guy to get information on. Not only was he long ago, but it's not like what we have today, all the resources available to help us with today. So I'm reading this from this book. It's called this chapter. There are 70 chapters, and this is chapter 60, and uh, and it's called "The Book That Changed the World." If we were to ask Ignatius to reveal the secret of his extraordinary dynamism and the hidden source of so much generosity, without hesitation, he would answer that this strength was a grace from God. So the grace of God is a big working principle here, and grace of God. We in AA, we get to uh, define things in our own conception. And for me, grace of God is a combination of guidance and power. Lack of power is our dilemma. Not knowing what to do is a thing that many of us go through. That's the doubt part of it. Um, and in the ABCs and how it works, we admit that no human power is going to solve our problem, and that it's going to take spiritual power. And um, so for me, the grace of God is a combination of guidance, direction, telling me what to do or what not to do, as well as the power to actually do that. So, the grace of God, which acts when we allow it to permeate us. For this grace to act, he had a formula. So we have a formula. We have the steps. We do steps 1 through 9 to get to conscious contact. And conscious contact is as simple as I'm no longer doubting the God stuff. Um, it grows, and we've talked about this before. There's a moment in the book where it says the my conviction of the presence of God acting in my life is the most important fact of my life. I can say that today. I've only been saying that probably the last 3 or 4 years, but it is the most important fact of my life. and that certainly was not always true. Um, so a spiritual awakening, our formula is we go through 1 through 9 to get this thing called conscious contact, and then 10, 11, and 12 on a constant basis. 10 is sometimes we break it down to 4 words: pause, ask and listen, and then do. And the pause is step 10, where I'm taking a look at what's going on. I'm taking a step back, looking at what's going on. I'm asking and listening in step 11 as to what my higher power how my higher power wants me to proceed. And then in 12, I'm actually doing it, because one of our principles is faith without works is dead. Understanding doesn't mean anything. It's effective behavior that we're trying to get to as a manifestation of our understanding, and why sponsorship is so important on the sponsor side, because that's where you get to put your understanding to work. So Ignatius had his formula, these spiritual exercises. We have our formula, our steps, and there's nothing conflicting about them. The emphasis is a little bit different. Words are often different, but it's um, they're complementary, and that's why we're doing this. For this grace to act, he had a formula borne out both by his own experience and by his dealings with others, namely the spiritual exercises. Ignatius has gone down in history as the author of this special formula, whose effectiveness has been incalculable from his time right down to the present in every part of the world. So, you know, we have our hero, Bill Wilson, and he writes this book. And if you're like me anyway, this book is our manual for living. It's our manual for transformation, changing our lives. It's our manual for coming into relationship with higher power and then determining what to do. And St. Ignatius, it's the same thing. He's the hero, and he's the one that writes the book. And I know I've recognized in myself a need to be a hero. I think it's in a lot of us, especially when you're a kid and reading comic books and you got all these heroes around, and you want a parade and a national holiday or whatever. Um, what I find today is how much I need a hero. I don't want to be a hero, but I like having a hero, and Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, uh, several of our AA saints, and certainly St. Ignatius and a lot of the stuff around him have become heroes for me. So this is talking about his book, Among the Books That Have Changed the World, and Alcoholics Anonymous is a book that has changed the world. The Spiritual Exercises has a place of distinction, not merely because it has been translated into so many languages. I think it's been translated into more languages than the big book. Um, but primarily because its message has been put into practice by millions of people. This little volume has gone through more than 4,500 editions, which averages one edition per month over the course of 4 centuries. It's a remarkable, when you realize that, it means this little book has had more translations, editions, um, printings, then I don't know how many they would say of the Bible. There are a bunch of different editions, and again, they're translations. But this number is astounding. Especially, you mention this book to somebody, and they're going to roll their eyes. They're not going to know what you're talking about. This book was composed to be lived, not read. Its success lies exclusively in the fact that it is so effective in what it sets out to do. Okay, so the spiritual exercises themselves are 370 annotations, and they're divided into sections. There's some preliminary stuff, and then he divides this into weeks, and it doesn't mean 7 days. If he'd used a different word, it would have been stages, or we're going to do this now, then we're going to focus on this, then we're going to focus, and there are 4 of those. So they call them the 4 weeks. And then he moves into the supplementary material, and these rules for discernment that we're trying to get to are the second section of the supplementary material. And in the very first section, Ignatius sets out what is called the principle and the foundation. And I'm not going to say, well, let's see. Primary purpose, being aware of my primary purpose in any given situation is enormously important to me today. And it's helped me handle bad AA meetings because I don't get the resentment I used to get in AA meetings when I felt like somebody else wasn't. They were either making it a worse meeting or not respecting the format or whatever. But when I understood, when my sponsor said, well, what's the primary purpose of a meeting? And it's right in the preamble, it's to stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. It's not the same as the steps. The primary purpose of the steps is to bring us into relationship with God, which we call a spiritual awakening, or we call conscious contact. The spiritual appendix has become really important to me today because it says, we gave you the impression that you need to have this sudden, vital spiritual experience, which is something that Ignatius definitely had. But now we're telling you that that's maybe 10% of us. The 90% of us go through a gradual awakening. In fact, the appendix says that uh, oftentimes other people see it before you see it. You don't realize how much you've changed. And on page 25, we read that thing that in the opening readings. It says that it says it has 3 parts. Page 25. There is a solution. Then it immediately says you're not going to like it. Nobody likes going through this stuff. Then it talks about a spiritual experience that how dramatically people change when they go through this stuff. And then at the end, it has this thing: you only got 2 choices. Going on to the bitter end, trying to blot out of your mind how miserable you feel right here, right now. And the other is to accept spiritual help, which we do in Ignatius's case by doing these spiritual exercises, in our case by doing the steps, by going through the steps. I believe today that I only have 2 alternatives. One of them is desolation and one of them is consolation. I'm either resentful or I'm grateful. Resentful is I'm in desolation. Grateful, I'm in serenity. And what I've discovered uh, is that serenity is, as I said earlier, a byproduct of how I'm living, and that's why that last reading is so important. Just to the extent that I'm humbly relying on God and trying to be the person God wants me to be, I will experience consolation instead of desolation. Well, right away in these spiritual exercises, Ignatius sets forth a primary purpose. And to put it in words that work for me, it would be that my primary purpose is to trust, love, and serve my Creator, and thereby, um, Ignatius says, save your soul. Um, I believe that saving my soul means fulfill the purpose for which your soul incarnated in this lifetime. Um, and that I can only do that by asking higher power, what is your will for my soul? Now, this is another place where for me it's a little bit different than the Ignatius posits this false spirit and this true spirit. And when we're under the when the false spirit is um, more important to us or speaking louder in our mind than the true spirit, we're in desolation. When the true spirit is, we're paying more attention to that or more identified with that, we're in consolation. Well, for me to make that work, because I've never really, I've experienced that conflicting feelings in my mind. But if you want to call one the devil, I get into trouble with that. And for me today, I'm just saying this to get it out there. I believe I have my human nature, which I identify as my body and my mind, and I have my spiritual nature, which I identify as my soul. And when the fears and desires of my body and mind are more prominent, I'm restless. I always wind up restless, irritable, and discontent. I try to do what my ego wants me to do so I can be a happy camper. And as soon as I've done what it said to do to be a happy camper, which in my case was drink, was the main thing I had to do, um, I wound up empty and dry, the way Ignatius talked about after daydreaming about um, knights in shining armor and damsels in distress and all of that kind of stuff. So, so for me, my primary purpose is to trust, love, and serve my Creator, which is humbly rely, and serving is actually being the person that my Creator wants me to be, asking God to mold my ideals and help me live up to them. Um, And if I do that, I will fulfill the mission of my soul, which I really have no idea about. I love this book called Journey of Souls that we've talked about before, where this hypnotherapist, um, in working with people, they kept slipping into a kind of voice of the soul. And at first, he was very skeptical, and then he started cataloging all these different experiences that people were going through, and um, wrote this book after 20 years of this stuff. And it's really remarkable. It talks about the life of the soul between human lives. And you may remember Emmett Fox is one that said, um, it's an article about reincarnation, and he says, relax. Um, your entire lifetime is one day in the life of your soul. Well, that means that my soul has incarnated. If you take 70 years and 300 days a year, that's 21,000. It means I've had many lifetimes, and I am personally convinced. I know we're way outside AA, but in the big book, but that's the point of this. We're we're trying to see where religion. We're being quick to trying to see where religious people are right. Um, it means my soul was a thing before my human birth date, and that my soul will survive my death. And the biggest change for me, but I have the advantage of being an old person now, um, is that where I've spent most of my life trying to please my body and mind, trying to make myself happy, trying to do the things that my body and mind said I'll be happy about, um, and it never worked out. Now I'm much more trying to pay attention to my spiritual well-being. And a wonderful example for me from the big book of this is Jim the car salesman. Uh, he's at this luncheonette and trying to work through a resentment toward his boss. And he says, suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put this whiskey into milk and take it on a full stomach, I'm not going to get drunk and I'm not going to do all the stupid stuff that I do when I'm drunk. And then he says, I vaguely sensed I wasn't being any too smart. Well, I think in that moment, um, his body and mind are saying, I need to drink. I can't handle this calamity here right now. And he only vaguely senses that you're going back to the asylum, Jim. You do this and you're going right back to the asylum. Um, and that's the way it is for me, except my soul's voice has gotten louder now. So uh, so the primary purpose of this endeavor that we're doing now is to especially the first one, rules for discernment, is to try to help me help you, if you want to try it, discern, um, why is my soul here, is to kind of say to the body and mind, enough already. I've been trying to make you happy for however long it's been. I'm going to start it to ignore you. You know, that there's this one spiritual author, and he says, treat your human ego as you would a naive pet. It's devoted to you, but it doesn't really know what it's doing. So it's kind of like you pet it on the head and you go, it's okay, boy, it's okay. Things are going to get better. Settle down, settle down. And I like that. And another image for me from the dog world is barking up the wrong tree. I think most of my life I've been barking up the tree of human. Um, well, let's see. I would say as a human being, my three fundamental endeavors have been self-preservation, self-gratification, and there's a third one, self-justification, trying to mentally justify my selfish behavior and trying to gratify myself. Well, that stuff is, I can tell you, not as important today as it's been before. And part of it is I'm better able to distinguish. Ignatius calls it the true spirit and the false spirit. I'm calling it my human nature, identified with my body and mind, and my spiritual nature, identified with my soul. So, let's see. This book was composed to be lived, not read. Its success lies exclusively in the fact that it is so effective in what it sets out to do. St. Francis de Sales used to say that this book produced more conversions than the sum total of all the letters used in writing it. That's an interesting statement. Um, let's see. It has been placed by a distinguished, well, it doesn't matter, among the books that have marked the destiny of humankind. This book has brought about a complete revolution in Catholic thought. Um, Nothing else can be compared with it. It's received more than, well, that doesn't matter. Very wise and universal code for directing souls. So one of the big differences between the spiritual exercises in our big book is the spiritual exercises are written for the sponsor, where the big book is written for the sponsee. The big book doesn't say anything to the sponsor about sponsorship, and we call it working with others. We say it's vitally important to the success of one's own sobriety, working with others. But the the book itself, the only time you need another person is for, it says, you know, if you want to take the third step prayer with somebody, that's fine. But when you get to step 5, you need another person in order to admit to God, to your fellow and another human being, God to yourself and another human being, the exact nature of your wrongs. Um, that's the only time you need another person. It doesn't doesn't say go find a sponsor, and it doesn't give us any training for a sponsor or anything else. Well, in this work right from the beginning assumes the book is written to, they call it director, spiritual director. And the other person is called the directee, or sometimes the exercent. It's an awful word, but that's the person that's actually, and they call it making the exercises, uh, not doing the exercises. Not that that's important, but so uh, so that's a real difference. And one of the things that I love is in one of these early annotations before you even get to the first week, um, Ignatius talks about the need for flexibility. He says this is uh, not a cookie cut. The same thing doesn't work for all people. You really have to get a sense of the other person if you're going to help them do that. And I love that. And I think I'm just going to stop just because I don't want to overwhelm you with stuff, and see what questions you may have. Uh, and I'm about to take off again, so we won't meet again for, it'll be 3 Sundays from now. I'll be gone the next 2 Sundays. And I will send out a notice and about some things to do to look at God's voice within to get going on this. But I just find it fascinating. There's a lot more about Ignatius's personal history, and I hope to bring that up as we go along. Um, this guy, Mark Thibodeau, he's a young man. Um, this is his like fourth book. He his first book is this one. This is about different types of prayer. Armchair Mystic. It's really good. He talks about talking at God, talking to God, listening to God, and finally what he calls contemplation, which is simply being with God. Um, and his second book is this one, God, I Have Issues, which is about prayer as well. God's Voice Within is his third book, and then later on came this one. This is the Examen. The Ignatian Examen is a fundamental thing we will be talking about as we go along. And then God's Voice Within. Oh, I wanted to show you. This is a little statue of Ignatius. Oh, and I want to show you a picture of him. This is this is a picture of him that was done. Um, sorry, later on. So I'm going to stop with that. Robin's going to stop the recording, and we will have some open discussion for